Hey, I'm Kai Down. If you didn't catch my video last week, I built a pedal board that I really wasn't happy with, and it's definitely in need of a redemption. Let's speed through a time-lapse build while I talk through some of the decisions that I made here. There's timestamps and chapters in the description box down below if you'd like to skip the build and get straight to my thoughts on it, or if you'd like to skip the build and my thoughts and just hear the tones. So the first thing I want to talk about really is what this board is for. Nothing is locked down as such, it's all sort of loose cables, nothing's cable tied in place. This is very much by design, as I like to swap my pedals around quite a bit. This is going to be sort of the basis that I build my pedal board from, but it's probably not going to stay exactly like this for very long at all. My pedal board is sort of a all-in-one, all-encompassing thing for different genres, different amps, different guitars, and different purposes. The main purpose of the board is going to be running in full cable method with my orange Rockerverb. This is sort of my jamming fun rig. I play through plugins and stuff like that all the time for work, and it's nice to have a rig that's specifically for fun. So some people took my last video to be a slight against Temple Audio or the Temple board system or anything like that, and I really did not intend for that to be the case. The Temple board didn't work for me because I wasn't using the pedal plates, I wasn't using a supported power supply, and I was sort of half-assing the system a bit. Now that only really matters if you're trying to cram as many pedals as you can onto a small board. This time I've gone for a much bigger board so I can use Velcro and I can use non-supported power supplies, and it all just works fine. I'll run through all of the individual pedals when we get to the playthrough side of it, but for the components we've got the Temple Audio Duo 34 board, we've got the Temple 4X mod for the patch bay, the IEC mod for power, we've got the Harley Benton modular power supplies. These can link together and let you have more power supplies per power supply. Then for cabling we're running a miscellany of random cables I've picked up throughout the years that all sort of look the same. These are going to be Ordo cables from Andertons, they're Rockboard cables, and I think some Donner cables in there as well. They all look similar enough that it looks cohesive on the board, but they're definitely not as synergous as they could be. I am kind of thinking of the future plans of this pedal board. So for the genres that I play, it's mainly around rock and metal, however I also do quite a lot of indie rock stuff. While it is a very fuzz-heavy board, I think that they all sort of serve their own purposes. Some of them are the spitty, arcadey style fuzzes, then we've got thick, heavy big muff things, and then we've got the more doomy things. The board is really centered around the HX1. Being able to run it either into the front end of the amp or in the loop, and be able to change these via different presets, has proven to be really powerful with this rig. I'll talk about that some more in the playthrough section, but for now, just know that that was a big part of this build. As for future plans, I'd kind of like to get a loop switcher involved. It would be quite nice to be able to reorder stuff on the fly, rather than having to patch everything in manually. However, this does mean that I'd probably need to switch over to the Temple plate system, and I'd have to get custom cables because my current ones won't fit in a loop switcher, and it's just quite a lot to think about, and I'm not quite ready for that yet. Another benefit is that it would cut quite a lot of the longer cable runs, so it'd only use the cabling that's required of that chain, for instance. This may help with some of the high-end loss that I get with running so many patch cables in one set. Obviously, I am already thinking about what pedals I'd like to add to this system. I'm thinking I might need a noise gate, as I use the one in the HX1 quite a lot, but it's not as good as a dedicated noise gate in a 4-cable method could be. I feel like I might swap out one of the fuzz pedals on the board for a distortion pedal instead, though I don't know what I'd swap out to make that happen. I think I'd like something a bit like the Fulltone OCD, but not made by Fulltone, as it gives you a nice crunchy thing into a clean amp. It's something that I'm noticing that I'm missing with this board. While I do like the Mooer Reverb and Delay, I may swap these out down the line for something more simple, something like the UAFX Heavenly Plate for the reverb and the TC Bucket Brigade Delay for the delay pedal, just to streamline things a little bit. I also know that I'm going to be buying the Zoom MS70 CDR Plus in the future, as it seems like it's going to be a really good option for wet effects. I don't know whether I'm just going to add this into my chain as is, or if I'm going to swap something out to fill its place. In typical pedalboard fashion, I've already got new pedals on the way. I've got the Holy Island Audio Mountain Mover coming in the next week, so that will probably take over my Big Muff style fuzz, and I've also got the brand new Tone X1 coming in. This should fit in my board quite nicely, as it will cover the amps as well as some drive tones. I want to talk about some of the negatives of building a board like this. Obviously, as I mentioned before, some of the high-end signal loss from running so many cables is something of a problem, but not a massive deal. It's also extremely heavy and impossible to carry carry, though that doesn't really affect me too much as it's mainly going to be staying at home. I'm not someone who gigs out, and this is sort of a studio home fun board for me. I do think at some point I'll reconsider the order of the pedals and maybe just shuffle things around a bit. I'd like to have the HX1 between the drives. This way I could run something like the Bucket Brigade delay in the HX1 into a fuzz pedal for some big ambient leads. It's finally time to run through some tones. I'll start by running through each of the pedals on the board individually. For this portion of the video, I'll be running my Balaguer Espada into my orange Rockerverb and then into Miko 2 for the cabinets. This Balaguer Espada is my new sort of reference point guitar. It's got vintage pickups, 25.5-inch scale, and it's only tuned down to drop D. I'm going to be using both of the tones in the amp, the clean channel and the dirty channel, so let's first hear the clean channel. Also, for a frame of reference before we get into the pedals, let's hear the dirty channel. For the start of the signal chain, the guitar comes into the patch bay in the guitar input and then comes out of the patch bay into the Zander Siclone fuzz. This is a Fuzz Factory style spitty vintage fuzz that gets really nice and arcadey. It does a lot of the gated sort of fuzz sound, but it also oscillates really easily and it's really fussy about power, so this one has to come first regardless. Out from the Zander Siclone, we come into the Websmurfer Red and Black Big Muff clone. This is a extremely underrated eBay seller here in the UK. It's not available anywhere else, but all of his pedals go for about 25 to 30 pounds on a bad day, and they're just fantastic. Truly like hidden gem. Out of the Websmurfer Big Muff, we go into the Earthquaker Devices Plumes. This is sort of Tube Screamer style, but it doesn't really give you that mid boost and low cut that the TS808 would. This is more going to be a sort of driving the amp into saturation a little bit further and with a nice big presence boost, which is great for low tuned guitars. One thing I will say about this pedal is that all of the sweeps on the knobs are extremely exaggerated. So if you turn these all the way up, it's going to be an insane boost and an insane presence shift and everything, but you know, you can really back this off. It's got a ton of range to it. After the Plumes, we've got the Goliath D-05 distortion. I'd say the distortion on this gets quite sort of woolly and maybe more towards fuzz sort of territories, so I prefer to use this as kind of a vintage overdrive. It does a really nice thing with polyphonic chords where it sort of stutters between the two. From the Goliath D-05, we go into my absolute best looking pedal, the Demiurge Instruments Doomy. Despite the pink pretty looks, this thing is heavy as all hell. This is based on the Earthquaker Devices live pedal, however in a much smaller enclosure. This thing is crazy. It's got an octave knob, which is going to be an octave up blended into your signal, and it's also got an additional boost control if you really want to push it to the limit. After the Doomy, we're into the Life is Unfair Bad Machine. I did a video on this pedal recently and I absolutely love it. It's a sort of Behringer Super Fuzz clone with a little bit of the Boss FZ2 mixed in and the HM2 style EQ circuit, which means this gets really, really gnarly. It has 5 different fuzz modes, which is great so that you can really dial it in for whatever guitar and amp you're using, and an extra boost switch just like the Doomy has, which you can shift either before the pedal or after the pedal. This is super versatile and I really love this one. Okay, we're now halfway through. Don't pay any attention to how the board looks because your eyes may deceive you. The next pedal we run into is the Line 6 HX1. This is still going into the front end of the amp. In the front end of the amp, I've got the HX1 doing all sorts of drive things, polyphonic pitch shifting, compression, stuff like that. The flux control in the HX1 gives me 2 sets of settings per preset. This means that using the expression pedal here, which is the headrush expression pedal, I can shift between a low gain drive and a high gain drive. From the HX1 we go into the Peterson StroboStomp HD tuner. This is the best tuner that I've ever tried, it's fantastic. Don't listen to people that say the tuner needs to come first, you know, for what I'm doing, really doesn't matter. As long as you turn your other pedals off when you're tuning, it doesn't make a lick of difference. So that's everything that goes into the front end of the amp. The tuner goes out to the patch bay goes into the front end of the amp, and then we're into the effects loop of the amp. The effects send comes back into the patch bay, and then it comes into this small clone chorus. I can't see the label on it, so I keep forgetting what it's called. This is another recent acquisition for me. While some people may wish that it had more controls, so a mix control, depth control, all those sorts of things, I find that the simple depth switch with 2 different positions paired with the rate knob gives me pretty much everything that I'd need out of a chorus. I may move this one into the front end of the amp so that I can experiment some more with it with high gain, but we'll leave that for now. Next is the TC Electronic Tailspin Vibrato. This is from their Smorgasbord series, which was a super cheap set of pedals that came out when I think Behringer bought TC Electronic. I'm not sure if that's 100% correct, but I know that Behringer had some play in the making of this pedal. And yeah, you can kind of tell. The power is kind of failing on this one, and it's really got to be in the perfect position to work, so that's something of a problem that I'll get to another time. That said, this pedal is pretty much solely on my board for disgusting alien noises. Now that I've got the chorus, I don't need the vibrato to do any of the pretty sounds, so this is really just for disgusting, horrible sounds. Now we're back into the HX1, and this is really why I bought the HX1 in the first place, being able to run the pedal twice in my signal chain and control everything via presets. I can now run drives and compressors into the front end of the amp, while I've got delays, reverbs and modulations in the effects loop, keeping them nice and clean. In the effects loop, I'm typically adding more sort of ambient reverbs that stack nicely with the Mooer, which I'll get to in a second, as well as extra modulations that I don't care about enough to put a whole pedal of it on my board, but I need it every now and then, sort of like flangers and phasers and ring modulators and things like that. We're into the Mooer delay, which, as I mentioned previously, I could probably just swap for a regular Bucket Brigade delay, as I only ever use the analog setting on this. That's not a slight against the Mooer delay at all, it's just overly complicated for what I use it for. Then finally we're into the Mooer Reverb. Again, I could probably just swap this one out for a standard plate reverb, as that's the only reverb algorithm that I use in this multi-effects pedal. The reverb then goes into the patch bay, and the patch bay goes out into the effects return of my amp, and that is my entire board setup. With the main run through done, let's start playing around and stacking pedals, just to see how it all comes together and how everything interplays with each other. I don't really have any specific combinations that I go to just yet, as this is a very fresh pedalboard build, but we'll experiment together and see what happens. This is still going to be using my Espada into the orange Rockerverb. Okay, so with the Espada back on the guitar rack, let's pull out the closest thing I have to a Strat, the GTRS S900. I do need to get a proper Strat someday, so please don't jump down my throat for this, but let's hear what this is doing. Now taking it in completely the opposite direction from a Strat, here is a 30-inch baritone guitar, my Balaguer Growler in drop E. This is the main guitar that I use for metal and hardcore and things like that, and it's just an absolute brute. Dry tone. So this pedal board isn't just designed to go in 4-cable method with my amp. I can actually jumper the two middle sections of my patch bay together and run the whole board into the front end of my interface and then into amp plugins. While this is a system that I could run in 4-cable method with plugins, I think that's just too convoluted of a setup, and this is really more about having fun. I still use basically everything on the board, including the reverb, because it just adds a nice layer if you're running it into the front end of an amp, especially a cleaner amp. First, let's hear it with the amped GNR plugin and my PRS S2 in drop C. With my Solar A1.6 29-inch scale baritone guitar in drop F sharp. This is running into amped block letter. So that's everything that I've got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for getting to the end of this video. I know it was a long one. The project files were like 300 gigabytes or something crazy like that. So, you know, I do really appreciate you sticking this one out to the end. I'll leave a link on screen now for you to check out some of the other demos that I've been doing recently. So feel free to check those out if you'd like to. Otherwise, please drop me a like, a comment, and a subscribe. It goes a long way towards helping me out. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Kai.